There's something about being deep in the wilderness that makes you feel free. No traffic, no crowds, no constant notifications buzzing in your pocket. Just miles of untouched forest stretching in every direction. For some people, that isolation is exactly the point. But the farther you get from civilization, the fewer rules seem to apply. And when something goes wrong out there, there's usually nobody around to help. The stories you are about to hear come from people who ventured deep into remote forests, expecting peace, adventure, and solitude. What they found instead left scars that still haunt them years later. And after hearing these stories, you may never look at the woods the same way again. Back when this happened, I was in my mid-20s. Long before I got married, long before I had kids back then, I spent most of my free time hiking alone. I loved backpacking through remote sections of the Appalachian Mountains, especially areas where very few people ever ventured. There was something addicting about being completely disconnected from the world. No phone service, no noise, no distractions, just me and the wilderness. A few times every year, I'd load my truck with gear, pick a trail, and disappear into the backcountry for several days at a time. One trip, I headed into a remote section of Cherokee National Forest. The first day was perfect. The weather was clear, temperatures were comfortable, and I barely encountered another person. By the afternoon of the second day, however, things started changing. I remember looking up and noticing dark clouds gathering over the mountains. At first, I wasn't concerned. Mountain weather changes constantly. But within an hour, the sky had transformed into something much darker. The wind suddenly picked up. The trees began swaying violently. The air temperature dropped so quickly that it felt like someone had opened a giant freezer door. That is when I knew this wasn't going to be a simple rain shower. A few minutes later, the storm hit, and it hit hard. Rain poured from the sky in solid sheets. Visibility dropped almost instantly. Thunder exploded through the mountains, rattling my chest. Then came the lightning. Several strikes landed disturbingly close to where I was hiking. Each flash illuminated the forest in blinding white light. I was carrying a large backpack with a metal frame. Not exactly ideal during a lightning storm. I needed shelter. Fast, I pushed through the rain, scanning the woods desperately. Then, through the trees, I spotted something. A structure. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, I realized it was a small cabin. It looked ancient. The wood was weathered and gray. Parts of the roof appeared to be sagging. The place looked abandoned. Still, it was better than standing beneath tall trees during a thunderstorm. I practically ran to the front door. When I grabbed the handle, it swung open immediately. The inside was dark. The smell hit me first. Rotting wood. Mold, something else I couldn't identify, something unpleasant. But it was dry. And that was all I cared about at the moment. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. For a few minutes, I focused entirely on catching my breath while rain hammered the roof overhead. Then I turned on my flashlight. That is when I started noticing things. The first thing that caught my attention was the wall beside the door. Dozens of scratches covered the wood. Some were shallow. Others were carved deep enough to expose lighter wood beneath the surface. There were far too many to be accidental. I slowly moved my flashlight across them. The deeper scratches appeared concentrated near the door itself, as if someone had desperately clawed at the wall, trying to get out. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Then I examined the door more carefully, and that is when I saw something that made my skin crawl. The locking mechanism wasn't normal. There was a heavy metal bracket attached to the outside of the door frame. It was designed to hold a padlock, but there was no way to lock the door from inside. No latch, no deadbolt, nothing. The door could only be secured from the outside. I remember staring at it for several seconds, trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was used for storage. Maybe livestock had once been kept inside. Maybe then I looked at the window, and my stomach dropped. The window frame had been screwed shut, from the outside. Whoever had done it clearly didn't want anyone opening it. What disturbed me even more were the marks surrounding the frame. Deep gouges scarred the wood, long scratches, clusters of them. Some so deep they looked almost violent, as if somebody had desperately tried prying the window open with their hands. The realization hit me all at once. Someone had been trapped here, not accidentally. Deliberately, the cabin wasn't a shelter. At some point in its history, it had been a prison. The storm outside suddenly felt much less threatening than the building I was standing inside. I was about to leave when I heard something scratch, a faint scraping sound. Coming from outside, I froze. For several seconds, the sound stopped. Then it came again, this time along the left side of the cabin, slow, deliberate, like something dragging across the wall. I held my breath. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then came two heavy thumps from the porch. Thud, thud. The entire structure seemed to vibrate. I stared at the door, waiting, listening. Then I saw it move. Not much. Just enough. The wood flexed inward slightly. Pressure. Something or someone was leaning against it. Not trying to force their way inside. Just applying steady pressure. Standing there, silent. I don't know why, but a terrifying thought entered my mind. Maybe whoever was outside didn't want to come in. Maybe they wanted me to stay inside. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to leave. Immediately, I tightened my grip on my flashlight and started moving toward the door. Then everything happened at once. A loud crash exploded behind me. Glass shattered. Before I could even turn around fully, orange light filled the room, flames. The entire cabin seemed to ignite in seconds. Fire raced across the walls with horrifying speed. Heat slammed into me like a physical force. I spun toward the door and grabbed the handle. Nothing. It wouldn't open. I yanked harder. Still nothing. Panic flooded through me. The door had been secured. From outside, someone had trapped me in a burning building. I started screaming. Not because I thought anyone would help, because pure terror had completely taken over. Smoke poured across the ceiling. The temperature skyrocketed. My eyes burned. My lungs burned. I threw myself against the door, once, twice, 3 times. The wood groaned. On the 4th impact, something finally snapped. The door burst outward. Fresh air rushed in. I stumbled into the rain and sprinted into the woods without looking back. Branches whipped against my face. Mud sent me sliding downhill. Behind me, flames illuminated the forest through the storm. I ran as fast as I possibly could. Then something hit me. Hard. A body slammed into my back. We crashed to the ground together for a second. I couldn't even process what was happening. All I knew was that someone was on top of me, trying to stop me, trying to keep me there. I fought with everything I had, punching, kicking, thrashing wildly. Adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Eventually, I managed to shove the person off. I didn't stay to see who it was. I got up and ran, and I kept running. Hours later, I reached a trailhead where someone finally found me and called for help. I was transported to a hospital. The doctors treated me for 2nd-degree burns and smoke inhalation. Physically, I recovered. Mentally, not completely, because I know exactly what happened that night. Someone tried to murder me, who they were, why they were there, and how many other people may have entered that cabin before me. I have no idea. What I do know is this. That storm may have saved my life, because if I hadn't stumbled across that cabin, I never would have discovered the person waiting in those woods, and if I had stayed inside even a few seconds longer, I wouldn't be here telling this story. Most people assume the worst thing that can happen in the forest is getting lost. But sometimes the danger isn't hidden among the trees. Sometimes it is standing directly beneath you, waiting patiently. Watching, and that is exactly what happened in the next story. After what happened in that cabin, you'd probably think nothing could feel more unsettling than being trapped in the middle of nowhere. But the next story proves that sometimes you are safest when your feet are firmly on the ground. Because once you are trapped high above the forest, there's nowhere left to run. This happened around 7 or 8 years ago. My friend Charles had a reputation among our group. If there was an abandoned building hidden somewhere in the state, Charles would find it. Old factories, forgotten hospitals, collapsed barns, decommissioned military sites. The stranger the location, the more interested he became. One Friday afternoon, I got a text from him. It simply said, "Found something awesome." A few seconds later, another message came through. A picture. At first, I couldn't even tell what I was looking at. Then I realized it was an old fire lookout tower. The structure rose above a sea of trees towering over the forest canopy. Charles claimed it had been abandoned for years. No maintenance, no staff, no visitors. Just sitting out there slowly rusting away. Naturally, he wanted to spend the night inside it. And naturally, I agreed. Looking back, that decision still bothers me, because if we'd left just a little later the next morning, I genuinely don't know if we'd have made it home. The drive took nearly 3 hours. After that, we parked near an old Forest Service road and started hiking. The tower wasn't accessible by any maintained trail. We had to navigate through thick forest using GPS coordinates Charles had managed to dig up online. The hike took roughly 4 miles. Most of it was uphill. By the time we finally saw the tower rising through the trees, both of us were exhausted. The structure was massive, far larger than I'd imagined. A steel framework stretched roughly 70 feet into the air. At the very top sat a small square observation cabin surrounded by windows. Even from below, the tower looked old, the metal was weathered and rusted. Several sections creaked softly whenever the wind blew. Standing beneath it gave me an uneasy feeling, like the entire thing belonged to another era, an era that had been forgotten. Charles, on the other hand, was thrilled. He immediately started climbing. I followed behind him. Each step caused the staircase to groan beneath our weight. The higher we climbed, the stronger the wind became. By the time we reached the top, the view was incredible. Miles and miles of forest stretched endlessly in every direction. No roads, no buildings, no signs of civilization, just wilderness. We spent the afternoon exploring the observation room and taking photos. As evening approached, we unpacked our gear and settled in for the night. At first, everything felt perfect. The sunset painted the horizon in shades of orange and red. The forest below gradually disappeared into darkness. For a while, we simply sat there enjoying the silence. Then Charles suddenly pointed into the distance. "Do you see that?" I followed his finger. At first, I didn't. Then I noticed it. A faint light, moving through the trees, far below us. At first, I assumed it was another hiker. Maybe someone carrying a flashlight. But something felt wrong. The movement wasn't natural. It didn't sway, it moved smoothly, perfectly, almost like it was gliding. The longer I watched, the stranger it seemed. The light continued weaving through the forest, slowly getting closer, and closer, and closer. Neither of us spoke much after that. We just watched, trying to figure out what we were looking at. 10 minutes later, the light reached the base of the tower. Then it stopped, directly beneath us. The forest around it was pitch black, only the light remained visible, hovering, waiting. Charles leaned over the railing. "Hey," his voice echoed through the darkness. "You okay down there?" No response. Nothing. Not even movement. The light remained perfectly still. I remember feeling a knot form in my stomach, because by that point it no longer felt like we were observing something. It felt like something was observing us. Several minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Still nothing. The light never moved, whoever, or whatever was down there simply stayed beneath the tower. Watching 30 minutes later without warning, the light suddenly darted forward. Not walked, not jogged. It zipped through the darkness with impossible speed, then resumed its slow, steady movement and disappeared into the forest. Neither of us had an explanation. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it had been another person. Maybe somebody exploring the area, maybe somebody messing with us. Anything else felt ridiculous. But neither of us truly believed those explanations. We retreated into the observation cabin, locked the door, and tried to settle in. Tried being the key word, because sleep never came. Every little noise suddenly seemed amplified. The wind, the creaking steel, the rustling trees below. Then sometime after midnight, we heard the first clang. Clang, the sound echoed through the entire tower. Both of us immediately sat upright. Another clang followed. Then another. It sounded like metal striking metal, loud, deliberate, as if someone was hitting the support beams with a wrench or a crowbar. The impacts echoed upward through the structure, each one sending vibrations beneath our feet. Charles grabbed a flashlight. I grabbed mine. We shined them through the windows. Nothing. The forest remained dark and empty. Then the sounds changed. The sharp impacts became something else, a grinding noise. Long, slow, metal scraping against metal. The sound made my teeth hurt. It reminded me of machinery being dismantled, or steel being twisted apart. The noise continued intermittently throughout the night. Every time it stopped, we'd think it was over. Then it would start again. Neither of us slept, not even for a minute. We simply sat there listening, waiting, wondering who could possibly be out there and why. Eventually, the darkness began to fade. Morning sunlight spilled across the treetops. The noises finally stopped. The silence that followed somehow felt even worse. We packed our gear immediately. Neither of us wanted to remain there any longer. We stepped outside and walked around the observation platform, looking down toward the forest floor. Nothing. No person. No vehicle. No equipment. No sign that anyone had ever been there. The ground appeared completely undisturbed for a moment. We almost laughed. Maybe we'd let our imaginations get the best of us. Maybe exhaustion had amplified everything. Maybe then we started climbing down. At first, everything seemed normal. The tower creaked as we descended. The stairs rattled beneath our boots. Then Charles suddenly froze. I nearly walked into him. "What?" He didn't answer. He simply pointed downward. I looked, and instantly felt every drop of blood leave my body. A section of the staircase was gone. Not damaged, gone. Roughly 3/4 of the way down the tower, an entire segment had been removed. Not just a few steps. An entire section. There was now a gap between two platforms. A gap large enough that falling through it would almost certainly result in serious injury. Or worse. I stared in disbelief, the grinding noises, the metallic impacts. Suddenly everything made sense. Someone had been working on the tower, during the night, while we were trapped above them, and somehow, they'd removed part of the staircase. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. If they'd removed one section, they could have removed more. If they'd wanted to strand us up there, they could have. If they'd wanted to wait until we climbed down, they could have done that too. We never found out who was responsible, and honestly, I don't want to know. After several minutes, we managed to carefully jump across the missing section. The moment our feet touched solid stairs again, we practically sprinted the rest of the way down. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us looked back. We ran through the forest, reached the car, locked the doors, and drove away. Only after we'd been on the highway for nearly an hour did either of us finally say anything. Even then, neither of us had answers. To this day, I still don't know what that light was. I don't know who spent the night beneath that tower. And I don't know how someone managed to dismantle part of a steel staircase without us fully realizing what was happening. What I do know is this: whoever was out there had plenty of opportunities to hurt us, and for reasons I'll never understand, they chose not to. As disturbing as that story is, at least James had another person with him. Someone to talk to, someone to confirm what he was seeing, someone to help if things went wrong. The final story is different, because when you are completely alone in the wilderness, and something begins moving around your campsite at night, there is nobody there to tell you are imagining it. And sometimes, you discover evidence the next morning that proves you weren't imagining anything at all. By the time most people reach adulthood, they develop a certain level of confidence in their ability to handle themselves outdoors. You learn how to build a fire, how to navigate a trail, how to identify danger. And after enough successful trips, you start believing you've seen just about everything nature can throw at you. That is exactly how I felt before this happened. And it is exactly why this experience still bothers me years later. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't something I could explain. It happened about 2 years ago during a solo camping trip in Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest. Camping alone wasn't unusual for me. In fact, I preferred it. There was something peaceful about being completely disconnected from the world. No phones, no traffic, no interruptions, just miles of forest and the sounds of nature. I arrived on a Thursday morning and spent most of the day hiking deeper into the wilderness. The farther I traveled, the fewer signs of human activity I encountered. Eventually, I found a small clearing near a creek bed. The location seemed perfect. Fresh water nearby, flat ground for my tent, and enough tree cover to provide shelter from the elements. I set up camp, cooked dinner, and spent the evening relaxing beside a small fire. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. As darkness settled over the forest, I climbed into my tent and quickly fell asleep. At some point during the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. Then I noticed something strange. The walls of my tent were glowing faintly orange. I immediately sat up. For a split second, I thought my campsite was on fire. My heart nearly stopped. But when I unzipped the tent and looked outside, I realized the light was coming from somewhere else, roughly 200 yards away through the trees. There was a campfire. A small one, just bright enough to be visible through the darkness. At first I wasn't concerned. Other campers occasionally used the area. Maybe someone had arrived late and set up nearby. But the longer I watched, the stranger it became. I couldn't hear anyone talking, no laughter, no movement, no footsteps, nothing. The fire burned steadily, completely alone. I sat there for several minutes, staring at it, waiting for someone to appear. Nobody ever did. Eventually, I convinced myself there was probably a reasonable explanation and returned to my sleeping bag. Still, the sight lingered in my mind. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. After breakfast, I decided to investigate. Finding the location wasn't difficult. The fire had been clearly visible from camp. Within a few minutes, I arrived at the exact spot where I'd seen it. Then I stopped, confused. There was nothing there. No fire ring, no ashes, no burned wood, no charcoal, no scorch marks, not even disturbed dirt. The ground looked untouched, pristine, as if nobody had been there for years. I walked in circles for several minutes trying to make sense of it. Had I somehow misjudged the location? That seemed impossible. The fire had been obvious. I eventually gave up and continued my trip, but the experience stayed in the back of my mind. That evening, I hiked even deeper into the forest before making camp again. The area felt more isolated than the first campsite. The trees were denser, the terrain was rougher, and as darkness arrived, the forest became almost unnaturally quiet. Still, I wasn't worried. I had spent countless nights outdoors. I knew how to stay calm. I knew how to assess risk, at least I thought I did. Sometime after midnight, a sudden cracking sound shattered the silence. Crack. The noise was so loud it jolted me awake instantly. A second later came a tremendous thud. The ground beneath me seemed to vibrate slightly. A tree had fallen. Somewhere south of my campsite. I listened carefully. Nothing followed. No storm, no wind, no explanation. Eventually, I settled back down. Then, about 10 minutes later, crack. This one was even louder. Much closer. Another thunderous impact followed. A second tree. This time somewhere northwest of my position. I sat upright, completely awake now. Something felt wrong. Trees don't simply fall one after another on calm nights, especially healthy trees. The timing didn't make sense. The locations didn't make sense. The entire situation felt off. Then I heard something even stranger, a low rumbling noise. At first, it sounded distant, almost like thunder rolling across the horizon. But it continued, and continued, and continued. The sound settled somewhere between a groan and a growl, deep, resonant, almost vibrating through the forest itself. I had never heard anything like it. Not from a bear, not from a deer, not from any animal I could identify. The sound persisted for nearly a full minute. I reached for my rifle and held it tightly. Every muscle in my body was tense. I listened carefully for movement, for footsteps, for breathing, for anything. Eventually, the rumbling faded away, and the silence returned. But sleep never did. I remained awake for the rest of the night, waiting, listening, watching. Every shadow beyond my tent suddenly seemed threatening. Every rustle sounded significant. By the time dawn finally arrived, I was exhausted. Still, I wanted answers. The first thing I did after packing part of my gear was search for the nearby fallen tree. It didn't take long to find it. The tree was enormous, easily one of the largest in the area. At first glance, it appeared exactly as expected. Then I looked closer, and my stomach tightened. The break wasn't natural. The wood wasn't simply snapped. It looked torn, shredded, destroyed. Deep gouges covered the exposed surface. Large chunks of wood appeared ripped away. The damage reminded me of something clawing, chewing, and tearing simultaneously. I crouched beside it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Nothing about it looked normal. Nothing. I remember feeling deeply uncomfortable standing there, like I was examining evidence I wasn't supposed to find. Eventually, I decided I'd seen enough. I turned around and started heading back toward camp. Then I froze. There were two objects lying on the ground, a blue bandana and a carabiner. For a second, my brain didn't process what I was looking at. Then recognition hit me. They were mine. My bandana, my carabiner, items that should have been inside my backpack back at camp. I stared at them in disbelief. The realization arrived slowly, then, all at once. Something had gone through my gear. While I was sleeping, something had entered my campsite, handled my belongings, taken items, and somehow moved them here. I suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Like every moment I'd spent in those woods had been observed, watched, studied. I immediately looked around. The forest seemed unchanged. Trees, shadows, silence. But now everything felt different. Now it felt like something could be standing behind any tree, watching me, waiting. The worst part wasn't knowing what had happened. The worst part was not knowing who or what had done it. I grabbed the bandana and carabiner. Then I practically ran back to camp. My hands were shaking as I packed the rest of my gear. Every few seconds I stopped to scan the tree line. Half expecting to see someone staring back at me, nobody appeared. No sounds followed me. No movement revealed itself. Yet the feeling remained. That overwhelming certainty that I wasn't alone. Within minutes, I was moving. Fast. I hiked back toward the trailhead as quickly as possible. My rifle remained in my hands the entire time. I didn't stop for breaks. I didn't stop for lunch. I didn't stop for anything. Hours later, I finally reached my vehicle. Only after the doors were locked did I allow myself to relax. Even now, years later, I still go camping. I still love being outdoors. But that trip changed something. Because every time I zip up a tent at night, every time I hear a branch snap in the darkness, every time I wake up unexpectedly in the middle of the woods, I remember those missing items, and I remember the uncomfortable truth. Something was close enough to touch my belongings, close enough to watch me sleep, and for whatever reason, it chose not to reveal itself. 3 different forests, 3 different people, 3 completely different experiences. Yet all of them share one terrifying detail. Each person entered the wilderness searching for solitude, and each one discovered they weren't nearly as alone as they thought. A cabin that appeared to be designed for imprisonment. A mysterious light beneath an abandoned fire tower, and an unseen presence moving through a campsite while its owner slept. Maybe there are logical explanations, maybe there aren't. But one thing is certain, the deeper you travel into the wilderness, the fewer witnesses there are, and sometimes, that is exactly what makes the forest so frightening. Which of these stories disturbed you the most? The burning cabin, the abandoned fire tower, or the campsite stalker? Let me know down in the comments, and if you've ever experienced something unexplained while camping, hiking, or exploring remote places, I'd love to read your story as well. If you have a true scary story you'd like to share, send it in using the submission link in the description. Your story could be featured in a future video. And if you enjoy true horror stories, disturbing encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. New terrifying stories are posted regularly. Tonight, before you go to sleep, just remember, the wilderness doesn't always feel empty because nobody's there. Sometimes it feels empty because whatever is out there doesn't want you to know it is watching.